Hi, I'm DV LeBron, and welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. Today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Michael Scott, City of Waxahachie City Manager. How you doing?
Fantastic, DV. How you doing today?
Doing good. So, like I've done for a couple years now, I'd like to talk to you about going into the budget negotiations, and we're at the very preliminary. You just had like the first workshop, so the city council has kind of expressed their stuff. So I kind of wanted to go through that and just inform the viewers on kind of what's going on and what are the priorities going in. Um, but first, what I want to do is have you introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the process, because I think that the process sometimes maybe people don't know the process, and maybe we can enlighten them.
You bet. Well, by way of introduction, again, my name is Michael Scott. I'm the city manager here in Waxahachie. Have been for about 5 years now. I've worked for the city for 21 years, and I can say without hesitation, it is the best place on earth to work. We've got just an incredible team of seasoned and experienced staff that are here to serve our community. We've got a council that keeps their focus on the important things, and it helps guide our direction. So a great place to be, and I couldn't be more excited to be the city manager here.
All right. Yeah. Well, you know what? It is a good city, and I love some of the good things that are happening. But like, there's growth, and all the pains that come through that. So I wanted to talk to you about this process then. So how does the budget happen? Like when we know that you guys got to start budgets, you start budgets somewhere around March, you start looking at things in your department heads and that kind of stuff. So can you kind of go through on how this all comes up to where it's sitting in front of the council?
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because people ask, well, we're up to at the city. And a lot of times, most of the time during the year, I'm saying, well, we're in the budget. They're like, well, you're always saying you're in the budget. I said, well, because oftentimes we are still in the budget. It does start very early in the year. And for probably about 8 months of the year, we're at least doing something associated with the budget as far as getting it pulled together for the next year. So this year, as you mentioned, we started around March and begin pulling together our 5-year capital improvement plan, refreshing that and making sure that it's still current. And so we did that this year, which led to a first workshop with City Council at the end of April 25th. We had our workshop with Council with just the focus, just the sole priority of looking at that 5-year CIP, looking at the current year. When I say CIP, it's capital improvement plan. Looking at that capital improvement plan and saying, does this still align with Council's priorities going forward? And what's interesting about that is, of course, just last Saturday we had an election, and so it kind of overlaps very closely with the election cycle, which, as you can imagine, if you had a wholesale change of council members, well, those priorities could change, and so then you're kind of back to square one. But in this case, this past weekend, last Saturday, of course, our current council members were reaffirmed, and so we have the same 5 council members in place. So we feel like that April 25th meeting was fruitful, and we kind of have our direction moving forward. So we reaffirm their priorities, council's priorities, and they've been kind of the same for the last several years, and which is no surprise because, as you mentioned, we're such a growing city that we've got to stay out in front of that and kind of try to manage that. So priorities range from quality of life, infrastructure improvements, public safety is always in there. As you can imagine, a safe city is a very important city for attracting new folks to the community. A focus on just making sure that we hire the best people, because we need good quality folks that can serve our community effectively. And so with affirming those priorities, we then looked at the CIP back in April and kind of laid out what those capital projects are going to be for this next year. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. I can talk through a little bit about what those projects are. Kind of, again, very preliminary. Nothing's been approved, but it's just kind of those preliminary projects we could talk through.
When you say capital projects, for somebody who may not know what capital projects mean, does that just mean big projects?
It does, but it also means they're one time. So imagine a street project. You're going to do that. It's not like a reoccurring cost. And so they're those big ticket one-time expenses that many times you can look for a couple different funding sources to fund them. And one of them, which I know some people don't fully understand or appreciate, bonds, but in the municipal world, bonding is an important part of being able to fund those large capital projects, just because you can't necessarily pay cash for these size projects. So we utilize, or we look at bonds, we look at using some of our general fund dollars to fund them, but also we have something at the city called impact fees, which are specifically used for and designed for capacity projects in the way of water, wastewater, and roadways. And so we look at those, and the developers pay those. So that's kind of a nice one for our citizens, that doesn't fall on their backs or out of their pocketbook. It's paid for by the developers who, when they come into our community, they contribute into a fund, and then we're able to use those dollars for those capital improvements.
So they pay the impact fees.
They do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the department heads, they come up to you and they say, Mr. Scott, this is what we need for the department going forward, or whatever, whether it be police, fire, and every other department. And is that kind of how it happens, how it comes together, and then you present it to the council?
It does, and it may be just a touch more complicated than that, only in that we look at a 5-year window. So we have a 5-year plan. So we're trying to look out and even project our anticipated revenues and kind of mirror those up with the projects that are coming down the pipe. And so really what it is that next year is just moved a year closer. So we look at those projects and we make sure that they're still relevant, right? I mean, nothing has changed, nothing is falling apart that we've got to quickly address, and that our priorities are still the same going into this next year. So we kind of have a plan. So I kind of know, say 95% of what projects we're going to fund this next year are on this 5-year CIP. Again, it's a plan. So plans are subject to change, but we really try to adhere to that plan, because it kind of reflects what our projections are in the way of being able to fund these things. And so, so we take that 5-year plan to council and just say, hey, here's this next year's projects. Are we all on the same page?
This is that plan you guys came up with not too long ago, where you joined with a company and you went through kind of planning the future of Waxahachie. Is that kind of what you're following?
Yeah, so we've had it for a number of years, and in fact, we've had a capital improvement plan for more than an operating plan. But we have a capital plan which speaks to these big projects. We also have a 5-year operating plan, which are those kind of reoccurring costs that the capital plan is not. And we have a 5-year window for that, and that one actually can be more subject to change, just because enough things change in your operating budget that's a little bit more flexible. And that's something we'll address at the next council workshop later this summer, is that operating side of the budget. So we're addressing the capital side first, then we'll move into the operating.
So you collected a little bit more revenue this year, I believe, than you did the year before, and mm-hmm. that's because of appraisals and stuff. So did you have to go to the council much for extra money throughout the year? How did the budget play out for last year as far as meeting the needs that we discussed last year?
Yeah, no surprise to anybody with inflation and so forth. A lot of the projected expenses that were put in place. Think about this: last October, right? So you're making a guess or an estimate, even if you have a bid. Last October, many times when it comes to actually spending that money, due to inflation and delays and what have you, costs go up. And so, yes, we have had to go back to council a number of times throughout the fiscal year. That's the negative side. But the positive side is sales tax in Waxahachie has been very, very strong. And it has been in a number of communities, especially in Texas. Texas has a very strong economy, and Waxahachie is no exception. And so we've really been able to lean a lot on kind of those increases in sales tax that have exceeded our expectations to help offset some of those additional expenses that we've incurred along the way.
One of the things we talked about last year was, and you're talking projects, we were talking about roads and how that happens. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to kind of for you to kind of let us know what you've done in the last year as far as roads. We were talking about scarification, and you were explaining that, and kind of update the viewers about what you did in this last year with that budget.
Right. So we have a couple different flavors of roadway projects. Some of them are much more elaborate, where we call them a corridor project, where essentially you take the entire right of way a street and the entire corridor. And essentially, we decimate the entire neighborhood street, and we rebuild the water, the sewer, the roadway pavement, the storm gutter, storm system, sidewalks in many cases, street lights, and we just completely redo that entire corridor. And those are very expensive projects. And so those are million dollar projects. And right now we've been working through Bellevue Edition, doing about a street and a half a year on those. And so we do those projects. And we're doing one over on Graham Street as well currently. And so those projects are currently underway. But also, as you mentioned, the scarification is that other flavor where essentially you're just you're retopping the street to give a new driving surface, much more cost effective to get a new driving surface. It's I don't want to say it's a Band-Aid, but it's a much lighter fix than a corridor project would be, but your dollars go a heck of a lot further. And so there was, I guess it was 2 years ago, I think we did 27 streets. All of Bullard Heights was redone under one scarification program. So your dollars can really stretch to address a lot of streets when you're doing scarification. Corridor, not so much, but sometimes the water and the sewer are failing, and so you really need to do those first. And so it makes sense just to go ahead and rip off the Band-Aid and do a corridor project.
So were you able to meet the goals that you had set on the last budget for the roads?
Yes, yeah. In fact, we're still executing on that, and so these projects take anywhere from 270 to 365 days or 360 days. So from 9 months to a year in timing. So a lot of times you've got multiple projects going on at the same time. But yes, we're still executing on those projects, and all the projects that were budgeted this past year will be completed here. At least be commenced this year. But a lot of times they span over 2 fiscal years.
So one of the things that is going on is that beautiful Beatty building, and then the retrofit of the current city hall. I believe it was like $7 million you had requested. And can you speak on that one, and we'll talk about the Beatty building?
Sure. So really, the Beatty building is probably one we probably talk about first because it's going to come online first, and so it kind of leads into the other one. The Charles Beatty Municipal Services Building, which is the building across the street, it's really been just a fantastic project, and I'll tell you one that is going to serve our community for years and years to come. In short, it really has become a one-stop shop for our development services community. So all of engineering, public works, utilities, building services, and planning are going to move, and GIS are going to move across the street into that Beatty building. And so essentially the whole development community can go there, get one-stop shop, talk to all the different departments, meet with those department heads and employees, and get their questions answered, which I think is going to serve us very well. And so that'll be happening actually July, I think it's 14th is our move-in date. We'll have a ribbon cutting the end of June. We're very excited for that. And that day's quickly coming. In fact, I think furniture arrives in about 2 weeks, and it takes a while to kind of get all the systems up and operational. But yeah, so July 14th we'll be across the street, or the development services folks will. And then as part of that, Dee, we're out of space here at the city hall, which is why we built the building to begin with. But the original building, which is the old post office, is a 1911 building. And as you can imagine, it's been piecemeal repaired through the years. Of course, there was an addition added on, which is where the council chambers, the municipal court are. That was back in I think 1998, I believe. And so essentially, the building is really kind of in need of some attention. And so what we'll do is when development services folks move out, the rest of the folks who would otherwise stay in City Hall are going to move across the street as well, temporarily for the next year. We have some extra space on the 3rd floor where it'll house the rest of us, and we'll clear out of City Hall and allow the renovation of the old City Hall building to take place without us interfering and kind of being in the way. So, and that's that $7 million. In fact, it's actually closer to 10. We went back to council at a workshop or a council meeting earlier this year and kind of explained why those costs went up. And so council saw their way clear to see that it really made sense to spend a little bit more money and do the renovation of City Hall proper.
Was that an inflation problem, or was that a you had to change the plans or something?
So this, I'll be honest with you, the $7 million, we hadn't done a whole cost analysis of it, of what all was entailed. And what happened was one of the priorities of the City Hall renovation was to give us a dry building. We have leaking issues and infiltration of rainwater, and actually groundwater too, throughout the building. And so it was kind of shore up what they call the building envelope and make sure we've got a dry building. Also, as part of that, the electrical systems are in shambles. I'll be honest with you, my office right here, you see these lights behind me. Well, if someone turns on a heater upstairs, these lights will go off. And then the other side of my office, if someone turns a pump on downstairs, they go, the other side of my office goes off. So it's that sort of Frankenstein type of situation we're in, that's been piecemealed, that we need to kind of get that straightened out, especially for the long haul and the benefit of this building to service for years to come. So that was a big ticket item that kind of drove the cost up. Additionally, and this is kind of a cool part of the project, I think, is the deck out in front of City Hall, the terrace outside of where the council chambers was originally designed with the thought of expanding into. And so we're able to actually close in that area where that terrace is and activate that office space. And the cost to activate that new office space is like about 30% what it would cost you to build new office space of that same square footage. So we feel like it's a good value to be able to add that space, and it'll give us a flex space. It'll move the court over there. It'll help us to streamline how we lay out our offices and our departments here at City Hall.
Okay. Well, it sounds like it's moving along. One of the other things that you talked to me about was the pipes being so bad, and you talked about sewage, refuge. Can you speak on that?
Sure. So, no secret, we're growing like crazy. In fact, we welcome last month we welcomed over 400 new citizens to Waxahachie, just because we CO'd a number of apartments, so it really drove our numbers up. But usually, most months we're over 200 new residents coming to Waxahachie every single month. So, I mean, put that in context for how we're growing. Well, we've got to keep up with that, and of course we've got a single sewer plant. We've got 2 water plants that have the capacity to serve them, but we also need pipes to get the water out of the water plants and into the neighborhoods, and to open up those new areas for growth. So that's one side of it. It's the water side. The wastewater side is another challenge, and that is, not only is it a capacity issue at the plant, but also most of our sewer actually goes through lift stations, and so upsizing those lift stations, which can be very expensive, is necessary to then pump the sewage up to the plant. So although a lot of the developments and subdivisions drain into a lift station, it then needs to be elevated to then flow into the wastewater treatment plant. So those all are just major capital expenses. And just looking at the 5-year CIP, actually it's not the 5th year, but it's shortly thereafter, we're going to be having to do probably the largest project Waxahachie has ever seen in the way of a sewer expansion project. I almost hesitate to even say the number that's being thrown out, because it's just crazy. And all it is an expansion. It's not a brand new plant. It is adding a lot of new technology and all that, but it's really just adding our capacity to where we can continue to serve the new growth that we're experiencing, because we're about at the point where we are forced to, by TCEQ, the Texas Environmental Quality of the state, requires that when you reach a certain percentage of capacity in your plant, you have to begin engineering that expansion. So that's the day that's quickly approaching, that we're going to have to plan for financially.
What does that expansion look like? I know you don't want to, but what's the ballpark that's been thrown at you?
Yeah, so today's dollars, 175 million. And yeah, so, well, I mentioned earlier about the impact fees, and so we're kind of squirreling those away as best we can to begin thinking about how we're going to pay for that. Part of it goes onto the rates, part of it goes on to the impact fees, part of it will be bond. And, it's going to be a combination of all sorts of different things that we're going to have to look to, because that is a big ticket. Just the engineering alone is I think like $15 million. So it's a huge project. Luckily, we've got a few years to plan for it, so that's why that 5-year CIP is so important. That way, it doesn't just sneak up on you. And my utility director comes down, next year and says, "Hey, we need to build expand the plant this year." I mean, we see it coming, and so we can plan for it financially and build it into our models and do so effectively.
It sounds big. It sounds very big. Now, how has the growth, as far as, because you had mentioned about the impact fees, as far as from what you've seen, from how has business and industry grown in Waxahachie in the last year?
Yeah, it continues to grow. In fact, one of the exciting things is because of the residential growth we've had, it kind of drives a lot of the non-residential interest in Waxahachie as well. And in fact, many of the listeners that maybe have begun to see some movement on the southwest corner of I-35 and 287, which is, a lot of people know, is the Blue Star, Jerry Jones property that Blue Star bought. And that project is beginning to kick off. And so there'll be an announcement very soon about what that is. I can't say right now, but it's a big deal. And the nice thing is those sorts of things are starting to happen. And there's a lot of interest in that project and in other like projects. They're going to bring some of that non-residential value to the community. And I shared last year, I don't know if you recall, but I shared last year that when people talk about tax relief, that's kind of the biggest ticket to getting tax relief is to grow your non-residential tax base, because it's very easy for the city to serve in the way of police and fire and so forth, because it's a large industry, has huge value that's on the ground, isn't us out doing code enforcement and expending a lot of resources to serve it. So it becomes very efficient for us to serve them, and then a lot of the base value goes to our ad valorem base. So those are good projects that have happened. Also, Laughlin Road is being expanded across to the west to connect into Marshall, and that actually brings with it some other non-residential development as well, which has been on the board for some time. So good things are happening in that sector. And we're very, very excited about kind of how that's all going to take shape. And again, the financial benefits to our residents.
So since you touched on it, I'm going to go ahead and go into that. Taxes and budget. Mm-hmm. So every year we talk taxes. There are people who are complaining that they're losing their homes, that they're unable to pay because their property taxes are too much. And every year there's an argument. There's state issues. The city's just a portion of that, and there was a homestead exemption that the council came up with. So what does that tax rate look like this year, Mr. Scott?
Yeah, so currently, of course, our tax rate is 63 cents per hundred, which if you look at it from a comparative standpoint, it is the lowest in Ellis County in the way of full service cities, which we're proud of, and that's certainly a priority of council. That's one of those priorities of council as well. So we don't know where it's going to go this next year. There are state laws that kind of restrict what that rate can do, and most likely due to the appraisals going up, the rate's going to have to come down. And so I can say that most likely that's going to be the scenario. The council is very sensitive to the tax rate. As you mentioned, the homestead exemption was approved this past year, which was really kind of a promise of council. Last year, when we held our rate flat, we said, hey, we're going to look at other ways to giving some relief to our taxpayers. And they were unanimous in wanting to do that. In fact, they were dead set on wanting to do that, which is fantastic. So we actually offer exemptions across the board, which again, if you compare that to other cities, I believe we're the only city that actually has all the exemptions available. So we try to keep the rates down, and we try to keep taxes low. I know appraisals go up, and it forces our rate down. And it's such a balance too, right? I mean, like we were talking about all these different challenges of having to fund roads and sewers and and everything else, and it all puts pressure on the budget. But we are sensitive to the tax rate and trying to just make sure that we're not setting at such a rate or a level that is provides for excess funds. It's really kind of bare bones, and I really pride myself on being a good steward, and so I really scrutinize our finance director, closely scrutinizes, and certainly our city council closely scrutinizes those budget requests to make sure that it's not just a a budget full of fluff. These are necessities to serve our community.
I was going to ask you that. If you feel like you've been a good steward to the people's money, and I mean, obviously you answered that, but the the was there anything in the kind of the budget? I know this is all preliminary, excuse me, but when you were looking at it, is there anything you were like, nah, we're not doing that?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's part of the process. So a director or a department comes forward with their request, which it's in a lot of ways it's like your kid's Christmas list, right? You can put anything on the list you want to, right? But that's when we're going to fund everything. And so no, that's part of the process. They come forward and they say, hey, we like to do X, Y, and Z, and we need a new truck and a new gator and a new mower, and we say yes to these two, but not on that one, or maybe next year on that one, or let's wait and see what the budget looks like. And so that's just part of putting the budget together, is scrutinizing those requests. And actually it helps me because it makes me go through them with a microscope to make sure that there isn't stuff in there that either one, I want to challenge or kind of push back a little bit. Hey, is there a better way of delivering that service other than just buying, a widget or hiring another person? Is there another way we can deliver those services without those expenses? And so it's part of the process of pulling the budget together. And I think we've done a pretty good job of it. And like I said, we've got enough eyes that are on it that we try to make sure that we're all on the same page and nothing kind of, gets through that isn't absolutely necessary.
So do you foresee a big growth this year in just the total number that's spent on this budget?
It's going to go up because I'll tell you, I've already looked at some they're of course, again, everything's preliminary right now, but even from the appraisal district, we have appraisals, which of course everyone's, seeing their appraisals, and no surprise, those numbers are way up. But also there's new improvements, which is really where the city can benefit a lot. Just those new improvements that come in that adds value to our base, and so that adds the revenue stream. And then sales tax, we're still projecting another 4.5% increase this next year, which I think is really kind of a conservative number. Even during a soft market, that we went through with COVID and all, we still, other than maybe 1 or 2 months, had very, very strong returns every month. And so, the budget's going to go up. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, things cost more. We're in what, a 7% inflationary market. We buy chemicals, we buy crack seal and whatever else we need to operate. And those things cost more money. So it's going to go up.
It's going to go up. Now, and I know preliminary, but like, did you talk with the demographers? Do they expect, what kind of growth are they looking at? I'm sure they probably don't have those numbers solid, but what are they looking at?
Yeah, so really our best demographers are honestly our in-house staff. We have such an incredible group of professionals. They're on the front lines, right? So they know what plats are coming in. They know what zoning requests are coming in. They're the best source of any projections. So we don't need some third-party projection, or saying here's what we see coming. Of course, the numbers from the Council of Governments validates everything that we're seeing locally. That DFW is a very hot market. And Waxahachie is seeing a big share of that. So yeah, we are still saying, we're at about 4% growth. Some months are higher than that. Like I said, when we just CO'd certificates of occupancy for apartments, when those come online, that adds, that many more dwelling units. So that drives your numbers up. But so last year was interesting because we really didn't have that many apartments that were CO. We had many of them to start, right? But we don't count them as on the ground until we actually CO them and they can be occupied. And so but this year, those projects are being finished up, and so we'll be COing those. And so our numbers are going to look a lot higher just because of those apartments coming online.
Wow, yeah, a lot more people coming. So there is and you talked about these capital projects and having to fund it out. One of the things that I covered recently within the last week before the elections were all the school bonds. Mm-hmm. All the schools in the area had bonds that they were putting out for this election. Some passed, some failed, but people are real concerned when they think bond. They think they see these numbers, these ginormous numbers. So do you have a bond that you're going to present to the council or that's going to happen anytime soon?
Yeah, we do, and I'm glad you bring up the school bonds, because I will tell you that I think with the Waxahachie ISD's bonds passing, 3 or 4 of them that passed, that's part of building a community. I was glad to see that happen, because that's just part and parcel to what we do here at the city. And so that's been so important as we grow and try to meet the growing demand. So I appreciate the citizens of Waxahachie ISD voting in favor of that, because it's a big deal, and it has a generational effect and benefit that generations to come are going to appreciate. But as far as the city is concerned, yes, to answer your question, so we have a couple of different flavors of bonds. We of course use GO bonds, which are general obligation bonds, pretty much every year. And so we do it in the summertime. With that workshop I mentioned on April 25th behind us, we've begun the process of going through with our rating agencies. We've got a very favorable rating rate with the city, between Moody's and Standard & Poor's. We're a AA and a AA2, which is a strong credit rating. And so with that in hand, we'll reaffirm that and then move towards issuing bonds later this summer. I mentioned a couple different flavors, because we have general fund bonds, which basically would fund the streets and the parks, and public safety. That would be part of the general fund debt issue, which is about $20 million this year is what it's slated to be. And then you've got water and wastewater or utility bonds, which we issue at the same time as the general fund bonds, but they're paid for through a different debt service on the water and wastewater side, and that's going to be about 17 million. So all told, we're about 37 million, let's say, of bonds that we're planning on issuing this year.
37 million. Okay.
I'm sorry?
You said 37 million, roughly?
Collectively, yeah. So 20 on the general fund side and about 17 on the utility side.
Now, people were concerned. One of the concerns that came up was, how that debt, and I mentioned it earlier, how's our debt service? Are we healthy? And how is that different from our house budget? I mean, our house debt.
Yeah. So when I got into public sector, this is one of the real educations that I got was discerning between public finance and personal finance, and public debt and private debt. And certainly, you hear Dave Ramsey or any other finance guy saying, you really want to limit your debt as an individual, which absolutely that's sage advice. And I try to do the same in my budget, my family budget. But on the public side, if you think about it, debt can really be your friend, because it allows you to spread those payments. Think about mortgage payment, right? Spread that out over a 20-year life of a bond. And therefore, if you're doing it if you're issuing bonds for a road, it's not just the people today that are paying for that $5 million road, let's say. You're allowing those people who are going to use it over the next 20 years to pay for it, because you've got all that new growth we've been talking about coming in, and therefore they're sharing the burden of paying for that debt. And so while you don't want to be debt heavy, certainly it's a tool that in public finance that really is almost absolutely necessary for a growing community, because you wouldn't necessarily be able to afford some of the infrastructure that's necessary to fund the infrastructure, but also this allows you to spread it out to where today's citizens aren't paying the entire burden.
So are we healthy?
We are healthy. In fact, those rating agencies that I mentioned earlier, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, look at our audit every year, which we just completed. Look at our audit and go through our finances and basically say, are you credit worthy, right? Are you a good loan that folks who want to buy your bonds would want to buy? So and minimize your risk, and is it a good purchase for them? So they look at that. And they're all saying, we have an unqualified audit, but then also those rating agencies are saying this is a good credit risk. And so we go to market and we get a very favorable interest rate, and that's where we get the benefit of having that good rating. Speaking
of interest rates, because they went up like inflation, like everything else, does that mean that we're going to pay a little more for that bond?
We are going to pay a little more, but I'll tell you this: the early numbers that I'm seeing, and you or I wouldn't be able to get this, but we're looking at about 4.25% this summer is what our financial advisors are telling us to factor in. So it's still a very attractive rate, and certainly better than what you or I could go get. And so it's not through the roof. It's more than we've paid in the past, but it's not the 6 or 7% that you or I would be getting.
It sounds like a historical kind of rate. That's kind of, I mean, if you look at it in the long run, that's probably closer because we were really low. So it's probably closer to the historical
yeah.
level.
Yeah, we were actually one year we issued and we were under 2%, which we're like, gosh, could we just get that every year? But I think those days are gone for now. So 4.25 still looks pretty good.
Yeah. So before I let you go or give you a closing statement to the people of Waxahachie, one of the things that are very, there's so much stuff happening in the cities with crime, with fentanyl, with their property crimes. There's a wide variety of stuff going on, and Waxahachie is not immune to it. It's here too. So when it came to the police and fire budget, is that something that you plan on prioritizing to the council? Is that something that they asked, you prioritize on?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always atop the list of priorities from council is, like I said, that good, safe community. Last year we funded a new fire truck.
I remember
a second ladder truck and the Fire Station 4, which is actually it'll be complete here, I think in about a month and a half, it'll be ready to be occupied. So big contribution to fire in that case. We actually have a second fire truck, a replacement truck that's in the budget this year. And we're not talking about a $300,000 truck. These are like $1.8 million trucks. And so big ticket and council puts their kind of money where their mouth is in saying that public safety is important. Of course, we're adding officers. We did last year anyway. We're adding some other benefits for the PD. We're looking at a new gun range at some point.
Hey, I'm all for that.
Yeah, it's needed. And then, like I said, public safety has always been a priority, DB, and it will continue to be, because you're exactly right. As a growing city, we kind of, we like to think we're still small town Waxahachie, but a lot of those elements that the big cities seem to have to deal with are coming to our community, and we just need to be ready to deal with it. And luckily, we've got a fantastic both fire department and police department. I mean, just full of just incredible professionals that are well trained. They've got the equipment they need. They know they're appreciated by our community, which I think is fantastic. They always get free lunches and a cup of coffee at Starbucks or whatever, just to show their appreciation, and they feel it, and they respond because they are such great professionals. And so I think we're in a good position from public safety, and we'll continue to fund it as necessary to meet the growing demands.
Is pay raises something you're going to include in this budget, just in general, or for law enforcement?
Not maybe just for law enforcement. Of course, they're on civil service, and so they have a step plan in place.
A scale. Okay.
Yeah, but what we do, one thing we do is look at COLA and make sure that as the cost of living increases, we're making sure that their salaries aren't flagging behind. And so that's not only true of public safety and civil service, but also just civilian employees as well. So we're always looking at that. We're in the process, or in the middle of a compensation study. And so we'll see kind of what the results of that are. And I know council, like I say, that's one of the important things for them, is to make sure we properly pay staff and can attract and retain just the best professionals we can. Because we're in the service business, and I say that all the time. We're in the customer service business here in Waxahachie. We don't make anything. Yes, we produce water, but aside from that, we don't make widgets. We're here to serve our community. And so we want the best qualified folks to be able to do that and do so in a very professional way.
Yeah, and that it is a service thing where the citizens of Waxahachie, they require things, and things have to be done. So I'm going to give you the mic to talk directly to the people of Waxahachie, and then I'm going to make a couple of announcements about who's coming up, and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I always appreciate the opportunity just to visit with you and kind of share what's going on at the city. We try to be as transparent as possible. And I know a lot of times on Facebook or on social media, they always say how things are being hidden or whatever. I just want you to know that I answer my phone. So if there's a question that someone has a question about, or something that doesn't sound right, or they want to know the whole story, they can call me directly. They can talk to my assistant. They can talk to my deputy director, deputy city manager. And we try to be as transparent as possible. So And please take advantage of that. We have a council that gives us great direction. I know they have are very attuned with the public's opinions and kind of has their ear out for things that we can be doing differently or better. Certainly, we're not perfect, but we strive to be. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we're in the service business, and we're here to serve our community. We're growing like crazy, but we're all in it together. And like I say, our priority is just to continue to make Waxahachie a desirable place to call home. And anything we can do to help further that, we're all ears. So again, I appreciate the chance just to visit with you this evening.
Yeah, and I love when you come on. We have some good conversation about this and get some really good information out. Part of this is the involvement of the people. All these workshops are open, and like and let me tell you, there has never been a time when I reached out to Mr. Scott and he didn't say no. He always says yes and is always willing to answer questions. I could email him. If I can do that, you can too. So take them up on that offer if you have a question. But, I plan on covering the budgets this year. One of the things that people were talking about was appraisers. So I plan on having Ms. Kathy Rodriguez, the chief appraisal officer, on to talk about that process, the non-political just process in general. That way you can understand how appraisals come to be. Again, Mr. Scott, thanks so much for coming on. And as you go on with this budget, folks, make sure you get involved. You'll see the workshops. And thanks again for coming on, my friend.
Thank you, DV. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.